Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einer weiteren Folge im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter, hier auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und in dieser Woche haben wir folgende Themen. Erleben wir gerade einen Machtkampf in der NATO zwischen Großbritannien und den USA? Droht Europa durch das Atomkraftwerk Saporoschje ein neues Tschernobyl? Und steigt Polen gerade zum US-Partner Nummer 1 in Europa auf? Hallo Scott, schön, dass du dir heute die Zeit genommen hast.
Hello, how are you?
Mir geht's sehr gut, danke schön. Ich hoffe, dir auch?
Yes, everything's good, thank you.
Wunderbar. Wenn du möchtest, starten wir direkt in die erste Frage. Wir schauen auf die NATO. NATO-Generalsekretär Jens Stoltenberg hat verkündet, dass er sein Amt ein weiteres Jahr innehaben werde. Hinter den Kulissen scheinen Großbritannien und die USA Schwierigkeiten gehabt zu haben, sich auf einen gemeinsamen Kandidaten zu einigen. London wollte gerne seinen Verteidigungsminister Ben Wallace. US-Präsident Joe Biden wünscht sich Medienberichten zufolge eine Kandidatur von EU-Kommissionspräsidentin Ursula von der Leyen. Warum wollen die USA künftig von der Leyen auf diesen Posten haben und nicht Wallace? Und Scott, welche Auswirkungen hätte eine Amtsübernahme von der Leyen für die NATO?
Well, first of all, it's a hypothetical because we won't know for at least a year, and a lot can happen in a year. We have a NATO summit convening on July 11th, where issues of critical importance to the future of NATO will be discussed and decided. NATO has tied its future to a conflict in Ukraine that's going badly for NATO at this point in time. So maybe in a year's time, Ursula may not want to be NATO secretary. Maybe NATO won't be the same organization that it is today. Maybe Joe Biden won't be president. There's just a whole bunch of possibilities there. I think Ben Wallace is not an attractive candidate for any number of reasons. First and foremost of which is the diminished military capacity of Great Britain. Why would you pick, as the person to head the NATO alliance, a defense minister who is overseeing the diminishment of Great Britain as a military power? The British Army today is pathetically small, woefully inadequate in every way, shape, and form in terms of meeting a NATO conventional military capacity. So he's unattractive to the United States and to many others, I would believe. Ursula, however, oversaw the absolute evisceration of the German military. Her tenure as the Minister of Defense for Germany was a disaster. So what we're seeing here is this is about politics, not about genuine capability. She is not the ideal candidate from a military perspective. But from a political perspective, she has shown herself to be very adept at, advocating forcefully for an American position. She ostensibly is supposed to advocate for Europe, but she takes a very pro-American position, and I think the United States enjoys this and would like to see her continue in that role as a Secretary General of NATO. But as I said, whether or not her candidacy will be considered or be considered viable in a year's time is very much an open question because a lot can transpire between now and then.
Aber würdest du sagen, es gibt diese Uneinigkeit innerhalb der NATO? Findet gerade ein Machtkampf zwischen Großbritannien und den USA statt? Hat London überhaupt etwas zu melden gegenüber Washington?
I think we need to be very frank here. There's no such thing as a power struggle in NATO against the United States. The United States reigns supreme. The United States is the only voice that counts. In the interest of diplomacy, the United States will hear other points of view. But at the end of the day, I can guarantee this, the United States will never do anything in NATO that it doesn't want to do. NATO will do everything that it doesn't want to do because the United States wants it to do. So there is no power struggle, especially between the United States and the United Kingdom. Special relationship is special in name only. The United Kingdom brings absolutely nothing to the table anymore. They have a shrinking economy. They have a military that is next to useless. And their impact, I mean, let's look across the board. in the G7, what do they bring to the table economically? Nothing. NATO, military alliance, what do they bring to the table? Nothing. So, the notion that there's some sort of power struggle between the United Kingdom and the United States is, even the worst fiction writer couldn't come up with a novel that made that seem plausible. So, no, the British, of course, continue to try and punch above their weight. They continue to believe that they are somehow the same power that existed during the Second World War, that they have the same relevance that they had during the Cold War. But the fact of the matter is they are, when you compare them to the rest of Europe, they're not powerful at all. The only thing they have going for them is a nuclear deterrent, but that only exists because the United States allows it to exist. The British lack the capacity to sustain this nuclear deterrent on their own. So, no, there's no power struggle whatsoever. I think England was looking at the potential of a power vacuum with NATO and thought they could slide an inadequate candidate into the mix, given the fact that NATO continues to have a very pro-Ukrainian stance, and Great Britain, the United Kingdom, has taken a lead in supporting Ukraine. But again, when we parse it out, the British support to Ukraine is more rhetorical, more political than real. Yes, they provide training. Yes, they've provided some Storm Shadow missiles. Yes, they've provided some military equipment, but that's it. There's nothing left that England can do. So, there you go.
Schauen wir auf das Kriegsgeschehen in der Ukraine. Kiew behauptet, Russland würde das Gelände des Atomkraftwerks in Saporoschje verminen. Der Direktor der Internationalen Atomenergieorganisation, Rafael Grossi, der aktuell auch vor Ort aktiv ist, der verneint das ausdrücklich. Moskau sieht hingegen ukrainische Vorbereitungen für einen Sturm des Atomkraftwerks. Warum sollte die Ukraine das AKW Saporoschje angreifen wollen? Welche Gefahren sind damit verbunden, Scott? Und könnte es zu einem neuen Tschernobyl werden?
I think anytime you play war games around a nuclear power plant, it should be of concern to everybody, just because there is the potential for bad things to happen. The Russians have the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant totally under their control. It's being managed by nuclear power professionals. It's being protected by the Russian military. So it's not, sort of ripe fruit ready to be picked. The Ukrainians view the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as an opportunity to get the international community involved in reversing Russian gains. The Ukrainian hope is that the international community in some capacity or another will intervene and seek to take the nuclear power plant under international control. And because the majority of the international community that is involved in this comes from pro-Ukrainian Western nations, any peacekeeping force that would be deployed, in theory, at the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia would be from nations that would therefore recognize the territory as belonging to Ukraine. And that's what Ukraine wants. They want to have an international community intervene, seize control of the nuclear power plant, and ultimately say that it belongs to Ukraine, not Russia. The Russians are going to have none of this. They will not support this. But what we're seeing here is the Ukrainians trying to create the fear factor, to magnify the fear factor in the West about the potential of a nuclear accident at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I don't believe that any Ukrainian intervention could result in a Chernobyl-type accident, just because Russia, has such a firm control over the facility. But the Ukrainians definitely want to create the perception that a Chernobyl-like event could occur, and therefore requires international intervention.
Hältst du es denn für möglich, dass die Ukraine tatsächlich einen Angriff auf Saporoschje durchführen könnte?
We're dealing with a nation that has blown up a dam, creating the most significant act of ecological terrorism in modern history. A nation that has blown up an ammonia pipeline. A nation that has, commits murder, mass murder on a daily basis. So yes, I think that the Ukrainian regime is fully capable of carrying out a provocation at the Saporoschje nuclear power plant. I also have confidence in Russia's ability to A, predict this, B, seek to put in the mechanisms necessary to mitigate to the fullest extent possible any consequences of a Ukrainian attack. But is Ukraine capable of doing this? Absolutely. They're capable politically because they are a criminal regime, and they have the military capability to inflict damage on the Saporoschje nuclear power plant. Russia has effective air defense systems, but they're not perfect, and they are capable of being overwhelmed if the Ukrainians sought to launch a massive strike. The only thing is, I think the Ukrainians have to be careful here because in order to do real harm against the nuclear power plant, they would have to launch a strike that would be impossible to blame on anybody else. It would be obvious to the world that Ukraine did this. And I think that at that point in time, Ukraine runs the risk of losing allies. Right now, while the issue is theoretical, it's easy for people to transfer blame to Russia. But once it becomes a reality, certain forensic realities, will point the finger directly at Ukraine, and it will be impossible for much of the civilized world to support them.
Schauen wir auf Polen, Scott. Polen treibt eine massive Aufrüstung voran und plant künftig die stärkste Landarmee Europas zu besitzen. Ausgerüstet mit US-Kampfpanzern vom Typ M1 Abrams, südkoreanischen K2-Panzern und US-Kampfjets vom Typ F-35. Deutschland hingegen hat Schwierigkeiten, überhaupt ein paar Leopard-1-Panzer fristgerecht an die Ukraine zu liefern. Was hältst du von den polnischen Aufrüstungsplänen? Kann Warschau damit wirklich Moskau Paroli bieten? Und warum setzen die USA auf die Hochrüstung Polens und nicht etwa Deutschlands? Verschieben sich da die Machtverhältnisse in Europa zu Ungunsten von Deutschland?
Well, we'll start with the last part first. Germany is already at a strategic disadvantage. Regardless of what Poland wants to do, Germany has allowed itself to be decimated by the impact of high energy prices brought on by the sanction policy, the policy driven by the United States and the European Union to sanction Russia. It's backfired, and Germany is paying a heavy price. Articles have been written that talk about the deindustrialization of Germany, that the German economy is being permanently and negatively impacted by these economic developments. On top of that, the German army, which was not healthy to begin with, after decades of neglect, the German army has found itself gutted by the requirements to supply military equipment to Ukraine, to the extent that the German military today lacks the logistical abilities to sustain its own forces in a large-scale ground combat. So Germany is incapable of facing off against Russia today, and the cost associated with rebuilding the German army is prohibitive. Poland, on the other hand, has not seen its capabilities brought down to zero. Poland has provided a significant amount of Soviet-era equipment, T-72 tanks, MiG-29 fighters, things of this nature, along with artillery, shells, and other military materiel and equipment to supply the Ukrainians. But its armed forces remain largely unchanged in terms of their pre-special military operation capabilities and their capabilities today. That's the good news for Poland. The bad news is, even at their best, Poland didn't have a very capable military. It's not capable of putting division-sized units in the field in an offensive operation using modern combined arms warfare, tactics, operations, etc. Poland would have to not only rebuild its military, but remember, there's a training component involved in this as well. So they would have to train their military to use this equipment in a modern combat environment. And the question now becomes, can Poland afford to do this? Does Poland have the economic means to pull this off? And the answer is, we don't know. We don't know what the Polish people will accept in terms of costs, etc. Poland is trying to make itself into a European powerhouse. Poland is trying to exploit the growing perception amongst Europe that Germany is a nation in decline, that the all-powerful Germany of the 1990s and early 2000s that no longer exists. And Poland is trying to say, we're the most relevant nation in Europe right now. We're the nation that can stand up to Russia. We're the front line. We need the investment. We need the support. We will define NATO. And that you're going to see in the NATO summit. You're going to see the Polish representatives together with the Baltic states make a pitch that those four nations are the center of gravity of NATO, and that NATO should be pouring resources into strengthening them at the expense of the other NATO members. But I think the fact is, Poland and the Baltic states will never be able to put together a military that is as capable as the Ukrainian military. And the Ukrainian military is getting beat on a daily basis in the current fight against Russia. So I see the Polish posturing as, the muscle flexing of somebody who probably shouldn't be flexing their muscles.
Wird Polen hier gerade zum Partner Nummer 1 der USA in Europa? Und wie werden die USA reagieren auf die polnischen Forderungen nach einer Stationierung von US-Atomwaffen auf dem Territorium Polens? Werden sie diese womöglich aus Deutschland abziehen und in Polen stationieren?
Well, Poland again has to be careful because the United States doesn't respond well to demands made on it by lesser partners. If Poland wants nuclear weapons, it needs to articulate a sound case for them. I think what Poland has going for it is that it is buying F-35 fighters, F-35A fighters, which are nuclear capable. The F-35A is going to arm the fleets of the 4 of the 5 nations that comprise the current NATO nuclear strategy: Belgium, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, and Turkey's the 5th one. Turkey was going to get the F-35, but right now there's some problems because it bought Russian S-400 surface-to-air missile, and the United States has blocked the acquisition of the F-35. But in April of 2022, the NATO Nuclear Planning Directorate came up with some concepts on how NATO can improve its nuclear umbrella. And one of the things was to focus on the F-35 and to seek to integrate current non-nuclear partners in NATO who possess the F-35 into the scheme. Now, it wouldn't involve the deployment of U.S. nuclear weapons on Polish soil. But what could happen is that Polish aircraft could be integrated into the nuclear delivery scheme, and they could be, for instance, flown to Germany and put on strip alert there. Or, they can be trained to use nuclear weapons without the nuclear weapons being put on Polish soil. And I think that's a more realistic option in line with the current thinking of NATO. Remember, NATO is a consensus-driven organization. And so I think it'll be almost impossible to find unanimous support for putting U.S. nuclear weapons on Polish soil. And the United States will be loath to do it from a unilateral standpoint, because that basically says that the NATO nuclear deterrent is irrelevant. It doesn't matter that the United States is seeking to go beyond that, and that I believe won't happen. So I think that the most likely thing will be that Poland will be invited to have its pilots trained in how to employ the B-61 bomb, but the bombs will remain in U.S. custody on German soil.
Aber sagen wir mal, es gäbe diese Möglichkeit. Wie würde Russland reagieren auf US-Atomwaffen in Polen? Haben Sie mehr Handlungsoptionen, als nur russische Atomwaffen in Weißrussland zu stationieren?
Poland is a NATO member, so any Russian attack on Poland would trigger Article 5, and Russia isn't in the business of triggering Article 5. What Russia would do is ensure that whatever weapons were put in place will be closely monitored by Russian intelligence, and that the Russians will come up with contingency plans that would have to be responsive to the potential of a Polish nuclear deterrent. Poland would have to understand that the gloves would come off in any potential conflict, and that not only are Polish sites going to be fair game for the Russians, they'll be fair game for the employment of nuclear weapons, Russian nuclear weapons. I think Poland should reflect on the fact that Sergei Karaganov, a Russian thinker, defense analyst who used to be close to Boris Yeltsin, he just wrote an article that articulated the case for Russia changing its nuclear policy posture from nuclear deterrence to preemptive nuclear strike, meaning that Russia could, under given circumstances, launch a preemptive attack using nuclear weapons. Those circumstances would include having its existential survival threatened by the policies and actions of NATO. In this article, Karaganov hypothesized a Russian nuclear attack against a NATO nation, and that nation was Poland, and the city was Poznan. So the Polish people need to reflect on the reality that when Russia thinks of using nuclear weapons, they think of nuking Poland. And that's what will happen to Poland if there ever is a nuclear war. So why would Poland want to have nuclear weapons on its soil?
Vielen Dank, Scott, für deine Zeit und deine aufschlussreichen Erklärungen.
Okay, well, thank you.
Bis nächste Woche. Danke.
Bye-bye.
Liebe Zuschauer, vielen Dank fürs Zusehen. Wenn euch die Sendung gefallen hat, teilt das Video breit in den sozialen Medien, abonniert eben noch unseren Kanal Gegenpol. Wir haben neben Scott Ritter auch viele weitere spannende Berichte und Analysen. Bis dahin, bis nächste Woche. Tschüss.